Welcome to Player Profiler Primetime News. I'm your host, Mike Lindberg, and alongside me is my ever insightful buddy, Jeremiah Retzlaff. Tonight, we're diving into the latest news and notes from around the NFL, focusing on the key injuries here, folks, and player performances as we gear up for Week 8. We'll kick things off with rapid-fire discussions, highlighting the significant impacts of the injuries to players like Jayden Daniels, Brandon Aiyuk, and DK Metcalf. Plus, we'll delve into the Bullish and Bearish segment where we'll dissect player values moving forward. Whether you're managing your fantasy lineups or just keeping up with the league, we've got you covered with essential updates. Jeremiah, let's get this party started. Yeah, buddy. Well, it has been a shootout in Minnesota. The Lions and Vikings had one for the ages yesterday. Jeremiah, break it down for us.
So the Lions, they even things up in the NFC North with the Vikings. They're now both atop 5-1. Both teams have a lot to look down at, except the Green Bay Packers are there creeping up. It's a very competitive division, and the Lions right now have that head-to-head advantage. Let's go into Jared Goff, 280 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. Jared Goff was steady against the tough Vikings defense, coordinated by Brian Flores, so a lot made up of that. 18.8 fantasy points has him right now into tonight, QB6. Shift over to Sam Darnold. Big game for him. The questions will linger until Darnold puts together an entire solid season. It's October, so the ghost could come back out soon. 259 passing yards, a touchdown, an interception. Konami code goodness, 4 rushes for 39 yards on the ground. QB 10 on the week right now, 16.26 fantasy points. Let's go to the backfield comparison. Jahmyr Gibbs, Sonic, got all the rings, right? Took advantage of an early David Montgomery injury, which looked serious. Ended up being okay. 15 carries, 116 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns. 4 catches, 44 receiving yards on 4 targets, 32 PPR points. He is the RB1 on the week. And your boy had Jahmyr Gibbs in DFS, and it was very, very nice. David Montgomery, Knuckles, was 9 for 31 on the ground, 3 catches, 39 yards. This is just the day where Gibbs was 1A. He got all the rings in the game, as I spoke to. Start this duo with confidence in all leagues. Gibbs, we talked about it in prior weeks. He lived up to his round 1-2 turn pricing yesterday. Now for the Vikings, Aaron Jones looks spry, 93 rushing yards, a touchdown, 3 catches, 23 yards, 20.6 fantasy points, has him as RB10 on the week. Aaron Jones has paid off at his ADP as RB16 for the season. He's the perfect RB2 for your fantasy teams. Now, entering the game, it was all about Amon-Ra versus Justin Jefferson, the elite matchup. Amon-Ra, 8 receptions, 112 yards, a touchdown, 25.2 fantasy points. He is wide receiver 1 on the week. The slot merchant can ball out. Gibbs and Amon-Ra carrying the mail on a Sunday for the Lions. Justin Jefferson, a little more workmanlike with his effort. 7 catches, 81 yards, a touchdown. Funny enough, this is just a meager game for Jefferson for his standards. 21.4 fantasy points has him as wide receiver 4 on the week. So the rest of the game was very pedestrian. We really wanted more out of this shootout game. Jordan Addison had a 3 for 66 effort, very respectable. Khalif Raymond, it was weird hearing his name, 3 for 39 on his day. JMO, who we've talked about, so hot, so cold. Went cold with 1 catch for -4 yards. So, Mike, you had more receiving yards than Jameson Williams yesterday sitting on the couch. Now, the Lions, they're strengthening their grip on the NFC North and the NFC as a whole. To come out of the NFC North this year as a divisional winner will really put whichever team wins in the driver's seat for the NFC. So it feels like the 1 seed will come from the NFC North. Sure enough, they're all beating each other up. But right now, the Lions are at the top. Mike, what do you make of that?
Yeah, what a game that was. I love that game. Excitement headed down the stretch. I was hoping, as living close to Minneapolis, I was hoping to see a Vikings win there, but the Lions, wow, did they look good? It's hard for them to stop. Jared Goff right now. He's playing some pretty good football after a slow start to the season. The run game is looking really good. They played a really good defensive team in Minnesota, and they they were very successful in all aspects of their game. So yeah, good on the Lions. And yeah, let's move on to some injuries here. Unfortunately, there was quite a few of them. Some big name ones. I wouldn't say there was quite a few of them, but some bigger names went down on Sunday. And the biggest name that shocked the waves was Jayden Daniels, his rib/oblique. There is optimism about his return for Week 8, but practice participation will be key to monitor. Man, it's tough when fantasy players go down in the first quarter of a game. It just really platoons your lineup and your gamers. So yeah, that one hurt. That was the first snowball of my last 24 hours, but we'll get into that a little bit later. It's been shit. But anyhow, we are back now, and let's talk about Jayden Daniels. What Mariota came in. Potentially, he could have came back in the game had they not been up 3 touchdowns, is the rumor I heard. I'm not sure that they were going to risk their young quarterback being up so much, but what's your take on this?
Oh, it hurts, and I was very sad, and it's okay. Sometimes in fantasy football, you just have to wear it, and sometimes there's weeks where you just experience mass, intense pain. Yesterday was a very painful day for Jayden Daniels getting hurt. I think since he's okay, I'm not nearly as down bad as I was. But man, it was really Jover for all of us with those 3. That was just like some dog water 3-game slate in the afternoon. It was awful. One note on Jayden Daniels at Player Profiler, we have this explosive play rating, EPX. It sounds like a radio station. Jayden Daniels has the most explosive plays in this metric with 31 for the season. And part of what goes into that is pass plays over 20 yards and rush plays over 10 yards. So I really want, and we talked about this last week, I think when we were hyping up the Caleb Williams, his performance against the Jaguars, I really hope we get that Jayden Daniels, Caleb Williams on the Player Profiler news page. We had put that poll up. It's getting a little bit closer between the 2 in Dynasty. So a gut punch, but I think if you're sitting as a Jayden Daniels fantasy manager, these names that we're about to read off, you're in a lot better shape than some other people, what we're going to speak to. Mike, what do you got on Brandon Aiyuk?
Brandon Aiyuk is now done for the year. That there was some significant concerns about his ACL, MCL, and it's done. So, he's done for the 2024-2025 season, looking good to start the year, hopefully. But this is a significant impact for the 49ers passing game. Looks like Deebo Samuel, from what I heard, he spent the night in the hospital trying to get some liquid out of his lungs. So he's got the potential of missing a game. George Kittle is always kind of banged up a bit. So my question to you, we saw some Jacob Cowling emerge there, kind of like the Tank Dell clone, if you will. But then you got Ricky Pearsall, who was also activated. He might now start, earning them spots. So how do you see the targets splitting up now? Obviously with CMC coming back too very soon.
Well, you're not going to have much more than a choice than to split off onboarding Ricky Pearsall onto the field. Jacob Cowing had a very beautiful play downfield. You got to keep him on there, and the 49ers are just going to have to manage. I think even if CMC returns, you're going to get a lot more calling still on Jordan Mason. Kind of like Isaiah Likely, you couldn't put the toothpaste back into the tube at a different position. I don't think you can put the toothpaste back into the tube entirely with Jordan Mason. So it could be a little more closer to the line of scrimmage because you've lost that Brandon Aiyuk element. And of course, Jacob Cowing has been running well. He's been healthy this whole time. Ricky Pearsall, I think, is going to take a little bit more time to onboard fully. So I would give the early lean to somebody like Jacob Cowing.
Yeah, me too. I really like he's a crisp route runner. I was really high on him. I was kind of disappointed when he got drafted by the 49ers, but I think this is a really good spot for him to be now that he can see the field. He made that really nice comeback catch on that deep ball that was a little underthrown to him.
And another thing, when we play and we get all these top of the depth chart players on our fantasy football teams, we just have to realize that every day there are people all across the country just clocking in to
Yeah.
the facilities, putting in work. Jacob Cowing gets his opportunity. If you were look at the impression that you just said, buried on the depth chart. So there you have it. He gets his opportunity here heading into week 8. And there's so many players around the league who are buried on rosters. Think of somebody like Isaiah Davis with the Jets. So cool to see Jacob Cowing get his opportunity. Now, Mike, can you tell us about DK Metcalf? It looks like he has an MCL injury.
Yeah, seems like there is some optimism, but the data leans towards him sitting out in week 8. If you have him, consider some alternatives. It looks like it could even be longer than that from some of the reports I'm seeing. So, looking pretty good for guys like JSN who are hoping to see emerge in the next little while. I'll get an official announcement on that. I'll pull something up, but I think it's going to be a multi-week game absence for DK here. But what we do know for sure is Deshaun Watson is out for the rest of this season. It leaves potentially a hole in the Browns offense, or is this a blessing in disguise? I think this is a blessing in disguise for maybe Kevin Stefanski, who's been trying to maybe push ownership into starting somebody else at quarterback. And it was kind of a surprise to see Thompson in the game there. But Jameis Winston ended up emerging. What are your thoughts there?
Well, the beauty is tight end 1 on the week so far, David Njoku, 23.6 points. He had a late garbage time touchdown. It paid off. I enjoyed it in DFS. I'm sure every fantasy manager who plugged David Njoku was very excited. Remember, David Njoku took off with Joe Flacco last year. And then, of course, Deshaun Watson has played so poorly. So in a weird way, addition by subtraction, this may end up helping David Njoku plenty. Real life, you hate anybody to have any sort of an injury, and you wish Deshaun Watson well, the person, because of the injury that he had, because he went through pain. Granted, the other karmic elements, I think everyone's well aware of that. But from a football standpoint, the Cleveland Browns, it sounds like they have some sort of an insurance policy on Deshaun Watson. So I think this is just going to layer them moving on, which is something that was needed for a long time. It's now just going to happen sooner rather than later. Had Watson not gotten hurt, he probably would have played terrible and would have been guaranteed to have the starting role the next week. So this moves that and accelerates the timeline.
Yeah, agreed. So Juju re-aggravated his injury and is expected to miss week 8. Could be more here. Nothing too much to get into there. The Rams Cooper Kupp is projected to return for week 8. It's a Thursday night game. I think a lot of fantasy gamers are really looking forward to see Cooper Kupp back in the lineup. Now, some bad news for the Raiders who, Aiden O'Connell was, starting his second game. Now he's going to require some surgery, looking like it could sideline him to 4 to 6 weeks and back to Gardner Minshew. So looking like the very similar offense without the Devontae Adams. So it's not looking great in Raiderville here. Nick Chubb's usage was about 36% snap share. He'll need to ramp things up in the next couple of weeks, but before you play him, consider him with caution, especially with this offense that isn't fluctuating. But Nick Chubb, great to see him score, and they're going to use him in the red zone. Anything to add to that there, Jeremiah?
Well, the next 2 weeks, the Browns get the Ravens and then the Chargers. And then, of course, the week after that, the New Orleans Saints. So if Nick Chubb is onboarding and just ramping up just a little bit by bit, he's about a month in, he'll get a prime matchup against the New Orleans Saints. So hopefully we get to see some of that old Nick Chubb. But I'm with you. I'm very cautious. Kind of like the J.K. Dobbins timeline. I'm not so sure how much you'll get out of Nick Chubb, but by all means, you're going to get a lot of heart. And in the attrition position that the Cleveland Browns are in, why not feed Nick Chubb inside the 10? I think he'll get plenty of looks. And of course, David Njoku is going to benefit. Now, it sounds like Travis Etienne, he's trending towards a Week 8 return, though there's a slight re-injury risk. He should remain a reliable option. I am just going to park that and tease that for our Bullish Bearish segment later.
Yeah.
And I'll head over to Tua. It looks like he's back on track to return in Week 8. This is very good news for all of the Miami Dolphins. So if you're looking at Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, Devon Achane, everybody's been hurting who drafted Achane and Tyreek for sure. I think if you have not been buying low on the Miami Dolphins, you've been messing up. And this is going to be a great opportunity. You're going to get some of these middle best ball teams to resurrect. And of course, if you've been hanging in on your playoffs and you have these Miami skill position players, it's going to feel like you're getting a healthy player back, even though it's only been Tua who has been hurt and out. It feels like all the players have been injured with how meager the production has been. What do you got next for us, Mike?
Well, we've got to talk about Jonathan Taylor. He might be looking to return in Week 8, but production will dip and may follow. So we're going to monitor the practice reports. Once again, Chris Olave expected to be back from his concussion, and while Derek Carr will still be out a couple more weeks, and that Saints offense is in shambles right now. They look anemic. And I'm really worried about Alvin Kamara's next couple of weeks, but that's a primer. That's a spoiler alert. Jonathan Brooks looking like he's back to practice, so we'll see what happens there. I think they're going to ease him in. I don't even know how much they're going to give him at all if they do use him much because of the situation there where the Panthers are in. They're not a very good team, and I don't know if I'd be rushing this young guy back into the lineup without much protection there. But there is optimism. You know, he's a playmaker, so they could use anybody they can get their hands on. Now, to wrap up this injury section of our show, what better way to close it off than hearing from the Podfather?
Hey, you're in your fantasy draft and someone says, hey, that guy's injury prone. I don't want him. And you're like, I don't know. I don't think you can predict injuries. Well, guess what? Now you can. Injury proneness is real. At Player Profiler, we have the data on these players, and it's all in the Injury Finder app. Their injury track record back through time, exactly where they were injured, how severe it is. We look at the BMI data, and we crunch it all together, and we give you probabilities that a player will miss multiple games this NFL season, as well as the complete database of NFL injuries and the ability to compare two players and look at their injury track record. The Injury Finder is powerful, and it's only $5. If it's worth it to have that peace of mind when you're drafting, go get it.
Wow, we should go get it. It's a great tool. And it was a good game. And you know what was great looking at was those Green Bay Packers sharp uniforms. I like those things. I thought they looked really sharp. You want to break down the game and give your opinion on the uniforms?
Yep. So the Texans and Packers, the Packers eke out a home win against the Texans, 24-22. This was a back and forth game, two evenly matched teams, a 2.5-point spread. And sure enough, this game ended up with a 2-point differential. This game could have gone either direction and shows you how close both teams are. If it's played in Houston, maybe the ball bounces the Texans' way. It was that close. Take Jordan Love, 16.8 fantasy points, QB9 so far into tonight's game, 220 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. There are memes going around where Jordan Love has 2 wolves inside him. One is Brett Favre slinging the rock into danger, and the other is Aaron Rodgers saying to throw it away. Jordan Love eerily has both traits of his predecessors. Look at the run that they went on last year, and of course, Jordan Love heaved up a Brett Favre special in the playoffs. So, CJ Stroud was 10 for 21, 86 yards. Awful. This was not a good day for him. He'd admit it himself. The Packers defense managed 4 sacks on the day and applied good pressure when Stroud dropped back to pass. So not a high-volume passing day for Stroud as it was. So he had pressure in his face. Stroud will definitely eat well next week. versus a friendly Colts secondary. Now, the Texans offense, it ran through Joe Mixon. He had 90s level workload with 25 carries, 115 yards, and 2 touchdowns. 26.4 points makes him RB3 on the week. Joe Mixon, back healthy, now has 3 top 5 performances. Joe Mixon is a top 5 running back going forward. Josh Jacobs was able to stand his ground, 76 yards rushing, 5 catches, 16 yards, had his first ever receiving touchdown of his career. I couldn't believe my eyes. 20.2 points has Jacobs as the RB11 on the week. Jacobs has been inconsistent with 5 weeks as RB23 or worse. So this was a much needed, but with the way Green Bay operates, Jacobs can only be banked on right now as an RB2 on a week-to-week basis. Fortunately, Josh Jacobs gets the Jaguars next week, so he can get healthy. Look for Jacobs to capitalize and stack back-to-back weeks in fantasy football as a top 12 running back. What your teams need, right? If you've got Josh Jacobs, you ask any fantasy manager, has your team been affected by injuries? The answer is unequivocally yes. So you're hoping to get some of that out of Josh Jacobs. You'll take it where you can get it. The Texans' air attack was paltry. Stephon Diggs was more focused on fighting pregame and only ended up with 5 catches for 23 yards. Dalton Schultz, 1 catch for 28 yards. It was a beautiful play. If you could go and replay it, that was really nice to see. Tank Dell, 0 catches. A lot of involvement, though, for him. This game might be the first sign of the Texans' offense truly missing Nico Collins as far as a differential in a meaningful game. Now, you take yesterday's game, 2-point differential, you tell me the Texans have Nico Collins, hey, you can make an argument there'd be a different outcome, right? But there's a lot of ifs out there in life. The Packers receivers, Romeo Doubs, 8 receptions, 94 yards, 17.4 fantasy points. Dontavian Wicks, 3 for 48 and a touchdown. Tucker Kraft, 3 catches, 33 yards, a touchdown. So Wicks and Kraft, they were waiver wire darlings a couple weeks ago. They had the most involvement. And then Romeo Doubs, who had a little bit of controversy and the suspension, drops an excellent game himself. Jayden Reed, Christian Watson, each had duds. The overall fantasy takeaway, the Texans and Packers players can get there in fantasy in a multitude of ways. So both teams did well through the ground. The Packers rotated their top receivers, where next week it could easily be Jayden Reed and Christian Watson. So keep starting all your Packers as well as your Texans. You're not going to bench Jayden Reed, although I'd be curious about Tank Dell unless you're desperate. So you might want to play Dell in DFS or lay a few small bets separate from your fantasy team next week. Now, Mike, can you tell us about a dangerous finish in Steel Town with Russell Wilson and George Pickens?
Yeah, crazy. In Steel Town, well, they've officially turned the page with Russell Wilson at the helm. Fantasy implications are exciting. Wilson's debut brought a refreshing spark to the Steelers' offense, particularly for George Pickens, who showcased his potential as a key playmaker. Instead of anticipating struggles, we witnessed a thrilling connection that fantasy gamers should be eager to capitalize on. In Wilson's first game with the Steelers, the team maintained a run-heavy approach, recording a 55.5 run rate, but he stood out. Wilson's efficiency as a passer, he averaged an impressive 9.1 yards per attempt and posted a 6.9% touchdown rate, significantly outpacing Justin Fields' numbers from earlier this season. The shift in quarterback not only added a new dynamic to Pittsburgh's offense, but also created a larger opportunity for running backs like Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, making the entire offense more productive. The real star of the show was George Pickens. He had his best game of the season, catching 5 passes for 111 yards and a touchdown against a tough New York Jets secondary with a near 30% target share. Pickens is primed to be a top 15 wide receiver as long as Wilson is starting. This newfound chemistry between the two is encouraging. Pickens looked re-energized, demonstrating his elite ball skills and making big plays downfield. Fantasy gamers should consider this a prime opportunity to buy high on Pickens after his breakout performance. As we gear up for Week 8, expect Wilson and Pickens to continue to build their chemistry, transforming Pickens into a must-start every week with the potential of even greater production. Fantasy gamers should feel optimistic about the Steelers' new offensive direction. What are your thoughts on that?
Love it. George Pickens, the work I do over at Destination Devi, working with them, it's now DD Fantasy Football. And George Pickens on the Trinity report was really tracking high, and it's a very predictive metric. And if you had read that, you would see how that predicts for future. Of course, a change in situation can help buoy players. Another metric here, again, as I talked about, the EPX, right? Explosive play rating here at Player Profiler. George Pickens is 5th with a score of 130. Again, pass plays over 20 yards or rush plays over 10 yards are considered explosive. So George Pickens has 7 of those plays. And what's interesting, in our fantasy scoring report, our advanced metrics we run over at Player Profiler, I'm looking at the QB scoring, right? Justin Fields has 114 fantasy points. He's 9th in fantasy football right now with his 6 games played. 19.06 fantasy points per game. There's just a divergence in play style where we love Justin Fields for how he can play. But I think both can be true where, yes, Fields can help you in fantasy. Russell Wilson is a better capable quarterback for somebody like George Pickens. And at the same time, Russell Wilson still may end up being cooked, but there's still some competence and capability to at least get somebody there fantasy-wise in the receiving game.
Absolutely. Now, if you're enjoying the show, don't miss out on more exclusive content. Subscribe to the Player Profiler YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter at Profiler_NFL and visit our website at https://www.playerprofiler.news for all the latest and breaking news. Now, Jeremiah, lead us into our bullish bearish segment.
0-1. Woo! M.O. Come on.
All right, we're back. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. It was funny there for a second. Tank Bigsby, I'm going to go bullish, and then you'll rip into bearish. Tank Bigsby, I teased before with the Jags. 26 carries, 118 yards, 2 touchdowns. No usage in the pass game. However, goal-to-goal situations, it was Tank Bigsby trusted at the goal line. D'Ernest Johnson mixed in for 38 rushing yards, 3 targets, 32 yards, 4 targets. There is some siphoning between the full workload. However, this will give Tank Bigsby a safer floor into next week. With Travis Etienne, the next 2 weeks, the Jaguars get the Packers and the Eagles. We saw what Joe Mixon did against Green Bay. The NFL trade deadline is Tuesday, November 5th. It's on Election Day. Should the Jaguars elect to trade Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby will be even more found money for fantasy managers. So it isn't out of the equation that the Jaguars keep Etienne on ice, both from an injury standpoint and in order to not harm his trade value anymore. You're riding this out in redraft. In Dynasty, if you have excellent depth at running back, you may want to instantly sell for a second while people are reactionary before we hit waiver wires this week, aka right now. Mike, what do you got for us for bearish on Alvin Kamara?
Well, it's not looking great after the last few weeks, and it's making me feel increasingly cautious about his fantasy viability, at least for the next couple of weeks. After an incredible start to the season, he racked up 362 rushing yards, 5 touchdowns in his first 4 games. His production has significantly declined in the last 3 weeks alone. Kamara's only averaged 76 rushing yards and 1 touchdown on 31 carries, along with 17 receptions for just 78 yards. The sharp drop-off raises concerns about his ability to maintain a high level of output we saw earlier in this season. A key factor to Kamara's struggles has been the overall decline of the New Orleans Saints offense. After starting strong under new offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak, the team has hit a rough patch. Obviously, they lost Derek Carr, whose injury has hampered the offensive rhythm and the effectiveness of it. Without reliable passing attack, the defense can easily focus on stopping Kamara, making it difficult for him to find running lanes. Adding to my concerns is the emergence of Kendre Miller, who is now back in the mix after recovering from a hamstring injury. Although Miller has not yet established himself as a consistent threat, his presence could eat into Kamara's touches moving forward, especially if the Saints continue to struggle offensively. With Miller's potential to take on a larger role as he gains health and experience, Kamara's ceiling could be further limited. Moreover, Kamara's recent game against the Broncos, where he rushed for just 10 yards and caught 6 passes for 14, underscores the challenges he faces despite the ability to salvage some value in PPR formats. The overall lack of yardage and potential scoring is alarming. Kamara has a proven track record. The combination of an underpour performance offense, the potential of competition for touches, and the decline in production leads me more of a bearish a prospect. So as I assess my fantasy roster, I'll be approaching Kamara with caution, keeping a close eye on how the offensive dynamics evolve in the coming weeks. I think they really need to get, Carr back. Looks like we got a start and sit question here.
Yeah, what do you think, Mike? Tonight, Kamani Vidal or Bucky Irving? You got to think the Cardinals' run defense has been getting crushed, but it's J.K. Dobbins season. Kamani Vidal did very well in his limited work. But then you have Bucky Irving emerging, but then is it Sean Tucker? Is it Rashad White? Bucky Irving? What do you got, Mike? What do you think?
I'm gonna have to go with Bucky here. I agree with that notion. I think that he's got the opportunity. He may even, I was talking to Jake on Player Profiler today, right before this, and he thinks that Bucky's gonna come out with the first drive, seeing how Rashad's been kind of banged up, so he may be the hot hand. So I'd be looking at Bucky as well. I'm very optimistic about the outlook of Vidal moving forward, but he's just not in a position yet where he's playing the snaps. He was outside of a big play. He wasn't that electric outside of that one design play he had. I think he only had 4 carries for 11 yards and then 2 receptions for 40. So a decent game, but he's not heavily involved. I think he's going to be slowly getting more involved in that offense as Gus Edwards is on IR. And you never know if an injury were to happen to J.K. Dobbins. Kamani Vidal is the hashtag Kamani code. Let's go.
Well, and to your point, you got Bucky, who's here, where we already want him. You got Vidal, where we have Bucky where he already is, where we want Vidal to be. Yeah. Kamani Vidal is going to onboard. I think he's going to get more work because he was very dutiful in the pass blocking game. So that's going to keep him on the field. Now, is it going to ramp up from his first appearance to this week? No. That's where Bucky Irving is already there. And tonight I go, like with you said, Mike, I'm going with Bucky Irving in that instance. But I expect to see a little breadcrumb today for Kamani Vidal. And then in these 4 weeks, at least minimum, right, that Gus Edwards is out, I think there's a accordion out opportunity for Kamani Vidal to take that job from Gus Edwards and chew off more. And then, of course, it's the attrition position. But 1-to-1, to me, I roll with Bucky Irving. So now, heading into our game in just a few minutes, we've got the Cardinals and the Chargers. Let's talk about it. All right, so let me rip. We've got the Cardinals tonight. I got the rundown on them. 44.5 point total with the Chargers favored by 1.5. Kyler's been hot and cold. QB9 on the season. Floated by 2 big games. Weeks 1, 3, 4, and 6. We're talking about QB15, QB17, QB25, QB21. Weeks 2, Kyler was QB1. Week 5, Kyler was QB5. So QB1, QB5 in those 2 big weeks. I expect more tonight. A big bounce back from Kyler Murray. And I've got bets on 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdown passes. I got a lot of bets on Marvin Harrison Jr. touchdown. Trey McBride, touchdown regression has to hit. James Conner, let's talk about him. 13.5 fantasy points per game. You're plugging Connor into your lineups. He's always dangerous for a touchdown equity. 3 touchdowns this year so far. At 29, James Conner is first in juke rate, 43%. First in evaded tackles with 44. 7th in yards created with 410. 8th in breakaway runs with 5. RB14 on the season. James Conner provided so much value so far against where you drafted him at ADP. Trey Benson only has 23% opportunity share, ranked 61st. Solely, Benson is a handcuff. Flex viability is a no-go. Benson is on your bench. Marvin Harrison Jr. returns from a concussion, wide receiver 27 on the season. On the brand new Player Profiler Explosive Plays EPX metrics, Harrison has a 105 EPX, which has him at 29th. It factors in, as I said, the per play efficiency, total volume, explosive plays created. It incorporates those 20-yard passes and those 10-yard runs. Marvin Harrison Jr.'s best game was week 2. He was wide receiver 1 against the Rams, 29 fantasy points. Harrison's over-under on Underdog Champions was at 49.5 last time I saw. Receiving yards, fantasy points, it's 9.75. I like the over, as both of those to me are low numbers. Understandably, it's a low line to be set, but this is where I expect the bounce back game from Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, Trey McBride, no boom week so far. We haven't had the 20-plus banger in PPR. We haven't had that game yet. No touchdowns receiving, no rushing touchdowns. Remember, McBride luck boxed into falling on a fumble in the end zone. Still, for tight end, McBride is tight end 4. 12.2 fantasy points per game is 3rd in the league. I'll leave it off with Michael Wilson, just a desperate flex play. Still attainable in Dynasty in a larger trade, but Michael Wilson is not a threshold player or receiver that you want, so temper your weekly expectations for him. He does provide the big body target that you need in an offense, but I'm not expecting much from Michael Wilson tonight. Mike, what do you got for us on the Chargers?
Let's do it. Let's cook someone up right now, Jer. Well, the Chargers have shifted to a more ground-heavy game plan. Justin Herbert still remains a solid fantasy option despite losing top receivers like Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Herbert still has the arm talent to exploit mismatches in the Cardinals secondary. Averaging 265 passing yards per game, he's capable of delivering solid numbers. This favorable matchup against a defense that has struggled to generate pressure, Herbert could put up significant points, especially if he connects with a couple deep shots. The guy I'm very bullish on, though, this week is J.K. Dobbins with an impressive average of 5.4 yards per carry. He's primed for a breakout performance against the Cardinals defense that has struggled against the run, allowing 135 rushing yards per game. Dobbins could see ample volume as the Chargers look to control the tempo. If he can find running lanes early, he could easily find the end zone, making him a must start as a strong RB2 with RB1 upside. Now, moving on to one of the questions here, Kamani Vidal. Well, J.K. Dobbins still takes center stage. Keep an eye on Vidal. Although he may not see as many touches, his explosiveness and limited opportunities could be valuable, especially if the Chargers establish a lead. In deeper leagues, he does represent a sneaky flex option who could capitalize on late game carries. If Dobbins has a big day, Vidal could also see red zone opportunities, enhancing his fantasy appeal. But like we said, we wouldn't go ahead and start him over a guy like Bucky Irving. Now, a guy I'm very optimistic about tonight also is Ladd McConkey this week. With the Chargers in need of reliable receiving options, McConkey has stepped up and has shown he can be a game changer. His speed and ability and his ability to create separation will exploit the vulnerable Cardinals secondary that has allowed big plays. If Herbert looks in the air, McConkey could have the potential to be a wide receiver 3 or even better, making him a great option for fantasy gamers looking for a boost tonight. So this matchup looks pretty good. for this Charger team, and this Charger team has looked all right, better than most people have thought they would come out of out this season. So I'm looking optimistic about Ladd McConkey and J.K. Dobbins, and maybe a sprinkle of Justin Herbert in the right situation here.
Well, I would say too, to your point about your big start with J.K. Dobbins, if you want a ladder on FanDuel, the odds up every 10 yards, okay, at 50 yards, it's minus 470, 60 minus 290, 70 yards minus 180, 80 yards minus 120. It doesn't become plus odds for J.K. Dobbins on a bet up a ladder for every 10 yards until 90 yards rushing at plus 122. So that's a live bet right there. So you're not getting your usual 50 or 60 close to even money bets into plus territory. You're having to climb the ladder all the way to 90 yards. And that just shows you how the books feel about something like the Cardinals rush defense, which has been absolutely brutal. I love your take on all that, Mike.
Thanks, man. Wow. That wraps up our show again. Like, Monday nights have come and gone pretty quick. We're already going into week 8 after this, Jeremiah. Where is the time gone, man?
It's insane, and it's just wild. Once we go to the off season, it feels like it'll slow down, but it's just wild how fast this has gone. We've really digested near half a season. It's been a pleasure to have everybody. Everybody go out, win your bets, win your fantasy football league matchups, get the Monday Night Miracle that you need. We will see you next week.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more. From the Podfather to you, I deeply